what she means when she says certain things. So here is the tape of an old person named Maggie Alec, or Mrs. Alex Sinclair. The reason for that was because there was so many Sinclairs around and so many McDonalds and people with the same name that they named them after their husbands. So the neighbors could distinguish which Alec or which Mrs. Sinclair they were talking about. And she went by the name of Maggie Alec. Now here is the voice of an old person that was 96 years old, or thereabouts, a month or so more, and she says on here, in April I'll be 96. And her memory was just as fresh as the day she went to school, in the old school days, although this particular person and many of the other ones never went to school at all. And they just lived their peaceful lives. They did the hard work, and everything they did was hard and primitive. They made their own tools, and they made their own recipes for food. They lived on wild game, and they lived off the gardens, and they lived off of nature. Here is the old lady's voice on this tape, and I took this tape 10 years ago, just about the time she died. And the day she died, she was telling the children how that they ate skunks and badgers and those kind of little animals, and squirrels even, and muskrats and so on when they were young, because and rabbits mostly, they lived on what they call a bush puppy. That is a rabbit, a wild rabbit. And these people lived off the land, more or less. They lived off of nature. They hunted wild game like deer and elk and moose, and they even ate bears when they got a chance, and they ate beaver and so on, what she was talking about the day she keeled over on the couch and died. The very last words almost on her that she spoke was about eating a skunk. Now, if you want to listen to the rest of this tape, I'll put some of it on about what this old lady told me and how they lived and how they got along. So here is Mrs. Alex Sinclair talking about the old days in St. Andrews, where she was born. She's a direct descendant of the Selkirk settler stock that came here in 1812. Now, when she mentioned Catfish Point, this Netley Creek, when it runs west there, used to join up with a little river, or a little stream called Stony Creek. And the catfish used to go up there, and these people had a little settlement out there. It's almost at the edge of what we call the bog on the way to Stonewall. And there was a settlement of those old-timers living there, and that's what she mentions, Catfish Point. It was even a post office at one time. So I'll resume now some of the other things that she's talking about. Now she named the members of her family.
Not, he didn't work on the lake after we got married. He used to work on a farm out there across the bog. And Sunday after we got married that he started, and then when we moved down here, at the time that he started to work on the lake.
It was a long trip and cold sometimes.
Yes, that's what for sure. When they used to travel with teams, and they had to have a stopping place every so many miles, you know, where they used to stop.
Pick up their feet and go on.
Yes.
Now, what she was talking about there was when her husband hauled fish on Lake Winnipeg from Limestone Point at the northern end, 250 miles down to Selkirk here. And then she mentions there the stopping places, and the way those Red River people would call that would be a stopping place. You see, that is the Red River lingo. And she says now that she stopped in the mall on the way from Matlock at old Peter Sinclair's down to Fulcher's at Parkdale and then on to Winnipeg. So now I'll resume the old lady telling you about going to these stopping places.
Stopping place every so many miles, you know, where they used to stop.
Pick up their feet and go on.
Yes. Yes.
So when you're standing
standing by the side of the road by the river. That's where your house was.
Yes, that's where our house
And
was.
you saw them coming along.
Yes, that was up at Parkdale. That was living up
That's
at
where you were born.
I was born down in St Andrews.
In St Andrews.
Yes, but we lived up at Parkdale, for a while. We went up back to Parkdale and we lived there before we come down to Nestle Creek there.
And then it was when you were on the river there that you saw these real rebellion. That was the days of the real rebellion.
Yes.
And you saw them.
That was the time Scott was killed. That time.
And you saw them coming.
Yes, I saw them passing. I can see myself standing there at the corner of the house yet looking at them, and they were passing. And I was kind of afraid, because I saw them. So my father said, "What are you scared of?" He says. He says, "They're not going to hurt you," he says. Because I saw them, they were all dressed in their soldiers' clothes, and they had their guns on their shoulders, on a fast there, and that's what I was scared of.
On horseback.
Yes, and they were all on horseback.
Were they bringing some prisoners along?
No, I don't think they had any prisoners, but just their officers that was along with them. They were going up to the upper fort there when they were taking the upper fort.
And when the fort was in Winnipeg, you visited that sometime, did you?
No, I never. The only time, when we were up in Winnipeg there, I was about 6 years old, I think. It was only me and my brother Jack that was born then. And that was the first one, when Winnipeg was first starting up, when we were up there. And we lived in a tent. My mother and father lived in a tent when we first went up there. Because my father worked helping them building it, He worked there for a long time.
And the old fort was standing there then?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
You walked into it?
No, I didn't.
You just looked at it?
Yes, I never bothered to. And me and my brother Jack had the cooking pot when we were up there. When we were up there. That's how I can remember,
That wouldn't be much fun, eh?
No, I should say not.
My name is Frank Walters. I'm the one that's making this tape years ago with this old lady. And my wife's grandmother, when she was a girl, worked at Fort Garry as a housekeeper for the governor's wife when it was standing there before in 1884 when it was demolished. And years after that, she married a boat bullier, the man that steers the York boats. He was half Indian and half Iroquois from down in Sorel in Quebec, and came up here and worked for the Hudson Bay Company. She was descendant of a man from the Orkney Islands from Stromness named Phillips.
And then from there, you see, from there, from St Andrews there, that we moved down to Jackfish Creek was the name of that creek that time, where Phillips and...
I've got an old map that says Napusni on it. Do you remember that name?
No, I don't remember that name at all. That is what they used to call it when Phillips and Peter lived down there,
All the Indians were living along the creek here.
Yes, but they might have been farther on,
When you went to watch them dance, they were down there.
Oh, yes. That was just before I moved out of Catfish Point. That we used to go. Me and Jemima used to go. Me and Jemima was nearly about the same age,
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and that was before.
All together then.
Yeah.
Did you go there looking for a boyfriend? And
No. We just wanted to have fun with the Indians.
And old Lester, we were sleeping there.
Yes, Lester was sleeping in the corner there, and one old wheeler strung Jemima, and strung her right, and she fell right on top of old Lester.
What was the name of some of the other old Indians lived along there then?
Oh, that was Oh, Muscupiness.
He was a chief.
And yes, and old Redbird. Yeah. No,
At Old Charlie Eden's there.
no, there was no ferry there. There was a bridge. There was no ferry at all there, but till they put the bridge on. The ferry was farther down. I was mistaken about that the Icelander Road there, you know.
Oh, yeah.
The Icelander Road was away down, all right, opposite Gilbert's there.
Yeah.
That's the way they used to travel, the people, you know. And that Mrs. Joe Henry, you said it was?
Yeah.
Well,
Now, in those days, a little after she came here, there was a ferry across the river night near the town of Petersfield here that the St. Andrews people crossed their teams on to go to the marsh, what they call the Netley Marsh, to make hay. And there was a man named Frank White used to look after it, and he had a little cottage on one side, and one old-timer told me by the name of Colin Muir that if you went to that ferry and the boat that he used to go to town with was on the same side of the ferry, he said you peeled off and you swam for it. That meant that you had to swim the river and go and get the ferry yourself to cross your team with, or else you wouldn't get across. And that ferry is what she never saw that one. She saw there was one further down that the Icelandic people used on the Gimli Trail, as they call the Gimli Trail. And that's what she was talking about just then. They made pork for themselves. They call it busting. Is that right?
Yeah.
You ever eat any of that?
Oh, sure. We lived on that.
They made it right at home.
Yes. We had 2 stones, you know, that where we used to. Oh, they were about the size of that basin, maybe round as that basin there, maybe a little bigger. And there was a hole in there, in the top one. And we used to put the wheat in that, and then in that hole there, and would turn it like this with our hand till it was all drained up. And sometimes we used to roast the wheat before we would put it in there. And of course, one would grind the wheat raw like that, would have to cook it, you know.
Yeah, afterwards.
Yes.
Like porridge.
Yeah.
But you grew it all and made it at home. You didn't have to go to the store for it.
Yeah, no, we didn't.
And I went to the store for very much because there wasn't no stores.
No.
You had to go.
And that's how we used to. Oh, and yes, we lived on that a long time, that. But that was healthy, you know, healthy stuff to eat.
And this wheat, the stuff that old Joe takes ground up in his mill, that would be wheat too, and everything you grew around, eh?
Oh, he used to make the flour in there. That's where we used to get my father used to get all his flour from. He worked at that mill with that. John Tate was the name of that. Joe Tate was old Joe Tate's father, you see.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. John Tate was the name of the old man that kept that mill.
Well, I heard years ago that he wandered out into the bog and died. You ever hear that?
Oh, yes. It was my father that found him.
Was it?
Yes.
What made him go out there?
Oh, I suppose he worked too hard, you know, and he kind of went out of his mind.
Did he?
And he wandered off from his mill one night. And when my father went to work at the mill long ago, when he was working there, the mist that told my father that the missed old John Tate. I didn't know where he wandered to. So my father got his horse and went on saddle to look for him. And he found him away out. They used to call that road out that way, they used to call it the public road. You know, that's what they used to call that back road, like that. Of course, it was nothing but mud, you know, that was not the roads like this. And my father went away out that way, and he found him lying along the bush, along the road, where he's been laying down, I suppose.
And he was dead?
Oh, yes, he was dead.
Was
he very old, or?
No, he wasn't very old, you know, but I don't know, they were saying that there was something that was troubling his mind, you know.
And now, something else about there's some old timers around that you knew the one old car. I'll interrupt here again a little bit. That mill the old lady was talking about was on what they call Parks Creek, and it ran through that parish farm that's out on the highway there at Parkdale. And there was a man named Parks lived there, and so they named the creek after him. And they had a paddle wheel there, a homemade affair with gears made out of oak, and it turned two huge granite stones, one on top of the other, that came from Scotland. They were made of the granite that they make curling stones out of. It's real hard granite that won't crack so easily. And they are chiseled in little lines running much like the leaves, the veins in a leaf. From the center down a line with little branches going off, and the grain, when it was squashed in between those two stones turning, the top one turned on the bottom one, of course. It ground the grain up until it came out at the side, and they swept it up and put it in bags and took it home in their carts. And that's what they called a ground grain, and they all used to go there with their Red River carts and get their little crops in. They thrashed them. They didn't thrash them with a machine at first. They thrashed them with a long pole. That pole had thongs, or what the French call babiche. It's made out of animal's hide called rawhide. And they tied knots in that, and they lay the canvas on what they call a beaten floor, and thrashed it by hammering it with those thongs tied to the end of a pole, and knocked the grain out. And and then they held it out of the loft or the hayloft door in a windy day, and put a canvas out on the ground below and let the wind blow the chaff out of it. And that's before they made that porridge called bustin'. Until they had the whole grain. That's how they used to have to do it. They hadn't got the machinery to do that with. And that was called winnowing the grain. And that Fulcher house, she said that her father went to, that was opposite that old parish farm there, and it used to be what they called a stopping place, as I talked about a while ago, or the halfway house between Selkirk and Winnipeg. It was run by people by the name of Fulchers, and it was a spot where the Lord and Lady Dufferin stayed in, and the Lornes, when they were Governor-General of Canada, they came west on a trip, and the reason that they stopped there was because they knew a woman that was living on a farm at Clannaboy by the name of Mrs. Muckle had gone to school with Lady Dufferin in Ireland, and their estate in Ireland was called Clannaboy. And when they heard that Mrs. Muckle was living out there, they drove out there in a buggy and asked her, Mrs. Muckle asked them, could they name the new town of Clannaboy that's on the highway now, on Highway 9 here, 8 miles north of Selkirk, if they could name it Clannaboy after the estate in Ireland belonging to the Dufferins. So that's it. I'll resume the story about where she lived and how her father went there to the mill and so on, and for your listening. Something else about there's some old timers around that you knew. The one old Corrigal that you was digging graves. You remember that?
Oh, that's old Thomas Corrigal's father.
Old Thomas's father.
Yes. Old Jim Corrigal called him.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
And they had that was before the church was there. They had graves.
Yes.
And then when they went to build the church, they moved the graves. Did they?
Yeah. When they built the church, you see, all those graves that was buried on the outside of the cemetery, like where they had it, you know. Well, they dug all them out. They dug all them up, and the ones that wasn't rotten, like, you know, they took them. And that's them that they opened. They opened the casket.
What did you see in there?
Well, some of them was turned on their faces, some was on their sides.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what did Thomas like that? The old Corrigal, what did he do?
No, when he was digging the grave, you see, he dug a grave, and he was down in the grave, and he heard somebody yelling.
Oh.
He thought he heard it, you know. And then he come out of the grave, and when he come out, he didn't hear no sound. So as soon as he went down again, he heard it again. And you see, it was, I guess some of these that come alive, you see, that was buried alive, that when they come to themselves, I suppose, you know, what could they do? They couldn't get out, you see, and they had to smother right there. And I guess it was it was some of them that this old man heard calling.
That's so. You really believe that?
Yeah. Well, you could tell because when they were dug up like that, you could tell how they were turning. You see, you could tell that they weren't dead.
Yeah, that often happens.
When they were buried, you see, they went in we used to call it the trench long ago, you know.
Yeah.
You know any more yarns about old people like that happened? Things that happened? Remember?
I might.
The old lady was talking for a minute about the difference between the two kinds of Indian moccasins. One was a pointed toe, and the other one was a round toe. And there was one old lady here called Lambert, and she used to make the round-toed ones, and everybody used to come to the house to get them. And then she talked about going to a dance with those moccasins and also with the homemade shoes, and you can judge for yourself what they would be like when you hear her tell about cracking boots.
No, clothes come to there, you know. And, you know, he used to always dance with his Auntie Liz, Auntie Catita, as we call that. He used to always dance with her, you know. First thing, as soon as he'd come in, you know, he'd make for her right away and take her up. And when he come to that dance that time, didn't he go outside and step in the water and made his froze his beef shoes? And when he come in the house, you know, the noise he made with that beef shoes, you know, when they were froze, and dancing with Auntie Liz, you know, and she used to like boots that she used to call cracking boots, you know. Yeah, you mind long ago, sometimes you'd get boots that would make such a heck of a noise, you know. And before these dances, she used to hang her shoes up on a line to dry, so as they would crack when she danced. And the night had a hard crack and go to Norman MacLeod's frozen beef shoes. Oh, man, we didn't laugh at him there, you know. He made such a noise when he come in the house, you know, and right up to Aunt Liz, you know, and up with her, you know. Oh, land,
Yeah, he used to have some great old dances in those days.
Yes. Oh, and that used to be just please her. She'd be proud about that, you know. As soon as she'd see Norman MacLeod coming in, you know, oh, there's Norman coming, she would say. And she would make sure that he would make for her right away and pull her up for a jig, you know, rid of a jig. Oh, and then we used to have a fun of them.
Dance and walk a straight line, and every time we old bagpipe records.
Yeah.
And that was the drops of brandy, wasn't it, they were dancing?
Yes, I guess so.
Remember that one, drops of brandy?
Drops of brandy and
Go round and around and around.
No, they used to stand in a string like this. Oh, the women all on one side this way, and the men all on one side like that. And this head one leg would take a partner from that way and go dance down this way. And then when they would come through this end, they would let them go, and the woman would go around that, and the man would go this way. And they would meet up there again and come dancing down this way again.
Have to go the whole line first.
Yeah.
Be out of breath when they got
then with the ones that was dancing, they would stand this side, and then the next couple would come on like that. They kept on like that till it ended.
They call it drops of brandy because they got kind of dizzy before they were finished.
Yeah. I don't know. I never got this when I danced. Rabbit dance is the same.
Oh.
They're the same.
But the jig, did you ever do the jig?
Oh,
the
yeah.
Red River jig?
I used to do it when I was young.
The fast step, isn't it?
No, it's not a fast step.
You have to keep going.
Oh, yes, you have to keep time, love. Keep time with the fiddle.
Mm-hmm. Fiddle was about the only music around here in those days, wasn't
yes, that was always. We used to think there was nothing like the violin for dances. Yes, I guess so. Yes, not like now. For goodness sake, all the dances they have now. Goodness sake, I can't make them out. The dances that they have now.
Well, you lived a long time and you've seen things develop in this Manitoba
Yeah.
for nearly 100 years, and there's a great change now, isn't there?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
from everything has changed, but in
yeah.
farming, for instance, right from the start when they cut it with a sickle and had a reaper and what they call a cradle to put it in. Did you have one of those at your house too?
Yeah, sure. Used to have one like that on the farm too.
The cradle.
Yeah.
And then right up till now.
And then we used to go around with the binders again. They would cut the grain and they would just throw the sieves out, you know, and would have to go around making bands with the sieves and put it down and put the sieves on there and then tie them. That's the way we used to do.
Because there's no string around then.
No
binding twine.
No binding twine like that. No. We used to make the bands with the grain. We'd take them.
Twist in your hand.
Yeah.
Get used to it. Do it pretty good fast when you got going.
Oh,
eh?
yes, we used
The
to.
kids have to work too?
Yeah, kids and all.
Everybody works.
Everybody watched that day.
There's no loafing around. And they brought lunch out in the afternoon.
Yes. They used to bring lunch out to us when we were working out in the field.
Mm-hmm. That was the best time, the lunchtime.
Yes.
And riding on the wagon through the grain.
Yeah. And after that days when they got the threshing machine, you see, they used to go around.
Yeah, those were great days, when the threshing gangs were around.
Sure.
Lots of fun then.
Lots of fun, and a big dance after it would be all over, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's the time your father used to lend the house to the Norman McLeod and Johnny Ross, you know. They would make their big dance after the threshing was over.
Who had the threshing outfits mainly around?
Oh, Norman McLeod and Johnny Ross had it. My brother Harry used to work on the mill, and Alec used to work on the mill. Now they've got this combines.
Yeah, there's no fun anymore.
No, there's no fun knowing it.
There's no big meals after with half a dozen chickens.
No.
You go out and kill a bunch of chickens and make a pie.
Yeah.
Everybody ate a pie each, couldn't you, eh?
No, there's no big meals like that, no.
It rained, you had to bet them all down till it stopped raining.
Yeah.
Well, that's when they'd have their dances while it was raining, eh? To pass the time away.
Yeah. It's a long time there.
We're talking about Mrs. Fulcher's now at the halfway house, they call it.
Yeah.
People
Mrs.
stopped there.
Mrs. Fulcher, that was what.
Did you know her?
Sure, I did. And they used to have that for the salon, you know. That's where the salon used to be.
Stop there and have a drink.
Yes, yes. And then the mill was right off from there, you see. The flour mill was right off from there. And that's where many of the time my father went there with his gallon jar for whiskey.
Oh.
Whiskey was cheap then, wasn't it?
Oh, cheap, I should say it was cheap.
50 cents a bottle, you get a whole wagon load at once.
Yeah, sure. Yes. Yes, that house stood. And I think it stood there a long time. No wonder that they didn't pull it down, you know, before.
It should have been preserved as a museum or something.
Yeah,
It was
sure.
part of the history.
Sure.
Those halfway houses were the thing in those days for people calling along when they traveled, eh?
Yeah.
Like the one down your father's brother had down here at the Matlock. That's Peter's stopping place there.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Sinclair.
Yeah.
Built himself.
Oh, yes, he built it himself.
Logs.
Logs.
That was there's another stopping place along Muckle Street too.
Yeah, and old Jim Stevenson. That's the place that old Jim Stevenson used to have his stopping place.
That would be about halfway to south of from Matlock.
Well, you see, that would leave Peter Sinclair's house down there, his stopping place, and then they wouldn't stop again till they got to Jim Stevenson's stopping place there. And they would stop there and rest there, you know, or stop overnight, and then from there they would make Selkirk with their teams and their fish.
And that old St. Andrew's Church is the one you went to at one time, was it? Or did you go to that?
I was christened in there.
Christened in there?
Yes.
You went to church often when you were...
Oh, when we were up there, yes. And I was confirmed in there, too, in that church.
Have you got a plot in there of your family? Has your family got a plot in there?
Oh, my father had.
Your father had one?
Yes. But my mother was buried up there, but
Where were you married? Were you married up there too?
no, I was married in Falkirk.
Oh.
I was married at Anglican Church, called Christ Church, in Falkirk. Where I was married in.
That wasn't so very long ago, no more than about 70 years, eh?
I don't know. Sandra Shades and Old Clifton wanted to know when our golden wedding was, Alex was still living then yet. No, Sir Alex said, I'm not going to tell them. He said, when my golden wedding comes. Oh, I says, Tom, they were going to celebrate for us, you see. And he says, they made the time our McDonald's golden wedding was, Duncan MacDonald that used to live up there, You see, they made a celebration for him on his golden wedding come, And of course, when the cock come in, like, we're standing all on each side, like, with the confetti on the throat. And he was bald-headed, Oh, he just had a little hair around here.
Yeah, I remember.
They were throwing confetti on him, and they had his bald head just covered with it. And oh my, Ali could never forget that.
Oh.
No, he could never forget that. He says, I made such a damn fool, he says, as poor old MacDonald, he says. He says, it's all right enough, he says, for young people, he says, to do that. That's not old people like that, he says. He didn't like that, so he says, he says, it'll be, he says, they'll never know, he says, when my golden wedding comes. So that they didn't know either. They didn't know till after it was over. About a year, I think, after. Oh, my old Clifton and Stanley was mad about it, And he said, he says, I didn't want them to make a damn fool of me, he says. He says to them, And then they found out funny. Oh, no, so he never could forget that, Poor old man, he says, looked so pitiful, he says, with his bald head all covered with confetti, he says. Going walking up there, he says.
Well, Alec wasn't bald-headed, was he?
No. I says, Tom, where was your bald head, I says, to throw it. So he says, I got it up all through my hair anyway, he says.
Yeah. Well, it's been nice. That old cemetery across the river called Stone Church in St. Peter's, there's hundreds of graves in there of infants. And a lot of it was because of the way they fed them. And, of course, there was this consumption around here, a lot of tuberculosis at one time, and a lot of them died with that. And now the old girl is going to talk about... they used to go out to what they call the pines at Birch Hill, where the moss was down on the ground, a couple of inches thick. It's called Jungermania in the scientific name for moss. And they use that for napkins. And she's going to talk about how they walked over there to gather that moss. Little baby, did you use moss for diapers and stuff like that? Did you use that?
Yeah.
How'd you get it?
Well, you used to go, there was a plane across the river from St. Andrews there.
Yeah, and towards Birchhill.
Yes, away out that way somewhere. And all the old wives used to go out there to the plains, and they used to go and hang with moss, hang them on the trees till they dried, And then they would go out and take this moss and bring it home. They would bring home bags of it, and that's what they used to use for their napkins.
No, I cut a piece out of the
free press one not so long ago that a nurse in Northern Ontario wrote a letter and said that the babies out there that she looks after, they still use that moss because it has some sort of an ingredient in it that keeps them from getting what they call diaper rash. And in those days when they used old rags and things for the babies, there was germs on them and one thing and another, and they washed them in the creek or the river, and the babies had sores develop on the lower parts, and with this moss, they never suffered that itch or that pain at all. I heard from some old ladies that when they didn't have any milk for the babies, they boiled fish, and they called it fish bouillon, and they fed the babies with that. Now, that might be the reason that so many infant graves are out in that old stone church in the east side of the river called St. Peter's Church. But this old lady tells me a story about a man going west with a horse that had a colt, and the mother died when she had a baby, and she fed the baby on the mare's milk.
Out traveling, when I used to travel with the old Red River carts, you know, and a horse. And he was out, and his wife was confined while he was out traveling, you know. And she died. She died while he was out traveling, and she left a little baby with him. And he looked after his wife too, you know, when they were out on the trip like that. And mind you, this mare that he had hit in the cart, she had a colt at the time, and she was milking. And mind you, that's where he brought his baby up with that milk, that mare's milk.
Oh?
The young baby.
That'll make them strong, eh?
Yes, before he could get back again off from his trip, like, you know.
Now, years ago, people used to have what they call a bed bug, and lice of all different kinds, too. They would live in the cracks of those old log houses, and they were hard to get rid of. And this old girl says that her husband got a package of bug killer and nearly killed himself with it. He put too much in the room at once, and he came out of the house choking.
So you only use half of it, you know. And all at once, I was sitting out at the back of the house here on that couch I used to have there. All at once, he come out. He come around that way, and he dropped right on the grass there. And, good, I said, so what's the matter, I said. And I said, I think you almost killed yourself, I said, with that powder. So it was a while before he could tell me and talk to me, you know.
Now, on this tape's all the highlights of what that old lady was telling me. And she's dead now, of course, and most of the old people that could tell me stories like that are gone. Their